Hi everyone, welcome back to the Tangerine Knits podcast. I'm Ichi, and first I wanted to say Happy New Year, and I hope everyone had a nice holiday season. In today's episode, I'm here to share some winter accessories, some items I've made as gifts, and also some knitting related Christmas gifts that I got that I'm pretty excited about. And I am currently living in Virginia, as I mentioned in previous episodes, and it is really, really warm today. It is 60 degrees out, and I'm sitting right by a sunny window, so it's quite warm. At first, I tried to wear one of my knitwear pieces, but it's so hot over here that I don't think I could make it. And with that said, I guess I'll jump into some winter accessories that I won't necessarily be needing today, but have definitely been getting a ton of use over the past couple of weeks when it's been pretty cold. And the first item is something that was a whip in my previous episode, and that is the cabled headband by Madame Fauvel, I believe. And if this looks a bit wet, it's because it is. I just came back from a trip to go to New York to see my family. And like I said, I've been wearing this a ton, not just in New York, but also just around here when it was pretty cold. And so when I came back from my trip, I gave it a good wash, and it was, not quite dried yet. So that's why it's like this. But I'll insert a photo of me here wearing this headband when it was quite cold out. This is knit in Cascade 220 Superwash Sport. In the previous episode, I was calling this yarn 220 Superwash Merino Sport, and although the yarn is Merino, it's not called that in the name, so I stand corrected. It's just called 220 Superwash Sport, and the colorway is iron. It is a pretty simple knit. I mentioned previously that I was looking for a headband pattern that is pretty simple but had some visual interest. And there's a lot of different types of twists out there for headbands, and I really like this cable twist. Since it's a free pattern, I can share a little bit about the construction, which is in the round, it's basically a tube. So if you open it like this, it's a tube that you knit in this direction, and then when you get to the point where you're ready to do the cable, you basically put half of the stitches on hold and then knit up a smaller tube this way, and then you go back to pick up these stitches, or not pick up, just put them back on a needle to knit this tube, and then you cross them before joining them again in the round to finish knitting. Last episode, I think I had knit maybe half of the cable, and I mentioned that I opted to do a provisional cast on so that I could do a Kitchener graft. I was hoping for a pretty seamless graft, although the other option is you can just do a regular cast on and sew it. And I don't think I did the best job here. I was so excited about the way I did the grafting for my vanilla sock that I showed last episode. I was like, wow, it's so seamless. You can hardly tell that there's any grafting seams here. And maybe it's because of the quality of the yarn. This one was a bit splitty, so I'll show that. I'm not sure if you can see from here, but the scar looks kind of lighter. And I think it's because as I was going in and out with the needles, I was kind of splitting the yarn, and so it became a lot fuzzier. So that could be part of it. And also, I will say the tension is not perfect. I won't pretend that it is. So I don't think I did as good of a job with the grafting here as I did in the vanilla sock. Although I think with the vanilla sock, it could be just because it's a variegated yarn, so it's really forgiving with any mistakes like that. But regardless, this is in the back of your head. No one's really going to notice, and I think it's definitely not more noticeable than if I did a seam. So I'm all right with it. And like I said, this is super, super practical. I can just fold this up and put it in my pocket or put it in my purse, and it's not as bulky as something like a hat. The yarn is really comfortable. I mentioned previously that I have, I'm pretty sensitive to wools next to skin, and this is perfectly fine on my forehead, on my ears, no problems with it at all. It is machine washable, but I was blocking something else that I'll show later in this episode, and so I just blocked this, or I just washed it in the wool wash as well. So, but I think, and I'm drying it flat, or it was drying flat before I took it from its drying spot to show it in this video, but yeah, it's going to dry, and once it does, and once the weather cools back down to a seasonable temperature, I will be back to wearing this very often. Okay, the next couple of items I actually don't have with me, so I'll insert a photo. They are all gifts. The first one is a red Oslo hat that I knit for my boyfriend Matt, And normally I would be able to just grab it from the house and show it, but he actually packed it for a trip that he's on currently. Although given this current weather on the East Coast, I'm not really sure that he really needs this triple brimmed wool hat. But I will say this was a Christmas gift, and right after he got it, he wore it almost every single day, and it looks so perfect for Christmas. I chose the red color partly because I think red is just a nice winter bright color, and also because he is a big Liverpool fan. So for those who aren't familiar with the Premier League, Liverpool is an English football club and their main color is red. So I thought this would be a good way for him to rep his club when he's wearing his jersey, especially because there's a local Liverpool fan club where I live, and they like to go watch the games at a local bar. And Matt doesn't go to every single game because a lot of those games are weekday afternoons or mornings where, he has work. But we have gone a couple of times over the weekend, and it's a really nice crowd. The bar is a little bit chilly. So I think having this red beanie to wear with his jerseys would be really nice for watching the game. So yeah, and he's really liked the color as well. He's worn it with a couple of different clothing items that aren't just neutral. So I showed him wearing that with a green sweatshirt, but also I've seen him wear it with a mustard colored flannel, and it also looks like a really gorgeous combination. In fact, I like it so much that I was so tempted to make a little red beanie for myself as well. Although, honestly, I don't think I'll get to it this year. But I think this was a very successful knit. I should say it's also knit in Cascade 220. This time it's the Superwash Merino, which is a light worsted. I think it's a light worsted weight. I used the recommended needles of 3.5 millimeters, and the fabric is quite nice. I don't have the item right now, but I do have some of the yarn that I can show you. So this is what it looks like. It called for, so at first I got one skein or one ball, which is 100 grams. I honestly misread the pattern. I thought that it would be enough. I just always thought of hats as a one skein type of project. But as I had knit the brim, it's a triple folded brim, so I knitted two lengths of the folds of the brim and realized it's definitely not going to be enough yarn, and so I needed to order more. But I ended up throwing away the ball band, or, inadvertently getting rid of the ball band. I didn't think I'd ever needed it, and I couldn't request the same dye lot because I didn't have the ball band. And so I paused on that project for a while I waited for the new ball band to get here. I paused right before the part that would be hidden by the brim. I figured that I won't need the full two skeins, so at least I could knit the inside of the brim with the new dye lot, just in case there's a huge difference. And I knitted that and consulted the hat and all sorts of different lighting options. Like I looked at it during indoor lighting and outdoor lighting to make sure that indeed there's no really stark line or anything. So either I got the same dye lot or the dye lots are just really similar. But regardless, the second skein looked really seamless with the first one, so I just went ahead and finished the rest of the hat with the second skein. And I do have a good amount left. I measured that I have 72 grams of this left, and I knit it pretty much to pattern, and I knit the second largest size. I also knitted this in secret. I wanted it to be a surprise because Matt really loves surprises, and so I knitted it in secret even though we live together. And this is a really bright yarn, so it's a bit hard to hide. And so what I ended up doing is our work hours are a bit shifted, so he starts and finishes later than I do. So when he's still working or when he's still in a different room doing his thing, I would be like on the couch trying to get a couple more rows in so I can make progress on it. And I also usually try to have another project nearby. I put my Ingrid sweater nearby, so when he walked over, I would kind of cover it quickly with the Ingrid sweater. And he never really noticed. After he opened it, the one time that he said, "Oh, I think I saw that, but I didn't even question what it was," is when I was blocking it. So, of course, when it's blocking, it has to lay flat somewhere for a relatively long period of time. And I didn't want to leave it out in the open, so I put it in this little cubby, the corner cubby of this corner of my little office area. And it doesn't get a lot of circulation, so it really took a long time to dry. I think after 24 hours, it was still not drying, and I really needed it to dry so that I could wrap it up. And so I ended up putting it outside in our little balcony area. I tried to strategically close the blinds so that it would not be visible at eye level. And turned out, I guess he did see it, but he didn't think much of it. So it was still a surprise. He was like, when did you knit this? So I think that was successful. But I will say, if I knit something else for Matt, I'm not going to do anything else in secret. A hat, I felt pretty confident just, knitting to pattern. And the fit of hats are pretty forgiving. But for anything else, I don't think I'll risk making something that isn't going to fit him. So, but for this, it was a good project, a good secret FO, I'll say. All right, the next object is another hat that I no longer have, and I'll show a picture or a video here of the classic ribbed hat by Pearl Soho. It is a free pattern, and I knitted this for my mom. I purchased the yarn, which is the Cascade 220 Superwash Merino in the colorway Silver Heather, and I brought it with me when I went to my parents' house during the winter holidays. My thinking was, I knew she liked this color because I was working on my balaclava number 1 at my parents' house when I was over there in the fall, and she was commenting on how lovely the yarn color was. And so I figured she'll like this color. I'd like to knit her a hat. If I can finish it, then great. If not, the hat will get used for some other purpose. And I actually intended to knit the Oslo hat, so once again I purchased 2 balls of that Superwash Merino. But my mom seemed to like the ribbed beanie a little bit more, and so I decided to give the classic rib beanie a go. So I knitted that, and it was a lot faster than I thought it would be. I guess you get a lot done when you're not working all day. So I knitted that in about 3 days, maybe 3 afternoons or evenings. I wasn't knitting all day or anything. And she really liked it. I knitted the second largest size, this time on 3.25 millimeter needles as the pattern calls for. And it is a little bit snug on me, but this is pre-blocking. My mom wanted to wear it over the day after I finished it, and we knew it wouldn't finish drying. So it fits her fine though. I have a pretty big head. So for my mom, it fits great. It looks really nice. It looks a lot smaller on me than it looks on her when I tried it on. Similarly to the Oslo hat I knit for my boyfriend, actually. For me, it was a pretty snug fit, but on him, there's a little bit of room at the crown, which he did like that look, but I just was kind of surprised at how big my head is compared to everybody else I know. So, I don't know. I guess I've never knitted a hat for myself other than a practice project that I didn't really intend on wearing. So I guess if I knitted a hat for myself, I should just keep in mind to make it a little bit bigger than what I usually would do. So there's that. The pattern is pretty straightforward, but I did do a couple of modifications. The first is that I did a tubular cast on, and I'll insert a video of what that looks like. So what I did is I did the provisional cast on. I used Roxanne Richardson's crochet cast on method because I find that it's the most foolproof method that I've tried, and I got it on the first try. Then I did 2 rows of double knitting, and then I knitted the brim to just a length that I thought looked good. And the rest of the hat, well, I guess, so after I knit the brim, when you have a double folded brim, the one side of the fabric is shown on the brim and the other side of the fabric is shown on the main hat. And I realized that the wrong side of my ribbing looks a lot neater than my right side. And I thought it was very dramatic, but after the fact, it doesn't really look that obvious unless you were really closely comparing the wrong side and the right side. Basically, on the wrong side, the knit stitches look a little bit tighter than the way the knit stitches look on the right side. So on the right side, one of the legs just seem a little bit looser than the other. And I'm not totally sure why that is. I had this whole journey of trying to get neater ribbing when I was knitting my petite knit Sunday sweater, which I talked about in my first video, and I didn't try any of those methods to make 1x1 ribbing neater because in the videos that I'd watched, some of them said that it wasn't really worth it for 1x1 ribbing, which I think makes sense because the whole issue, if you haven't watched that video, is that I've noticed that when I knit ribbing, there's one column of knit stitches that are really loose, and of course if you have 2x2 rib or 3x3 rib, it's really obvious when one knit stitch is looser than the rest in that section. But if it's 1x1 rib, then all of those stitches are consistent, so maybe it's not really a big deal. Yeah, anyway, I didn't bother to do any of the adjustments that I had learned for the Sunday sweater. So I ended up still thinking that I'll do a little experiment. I was thinking, what if I just start knitting the rest of the hat inside out so that on the brim, the neater side is showing, and then on the rest of the hat, the neater side is showing. I'm doing air quotes now because looking back at the footage, I don't think it's really that obvious. Again, I'm not recommending that you go and do this. I'm just going to share this little experiment I decided to try. So what I did is that after I knit the brim, I did a turn, similarly to how you do a German short row turn, but it wasn't a short row, it was just a full row. And so I started knitting the opposite way and knitting the hat inside out, so that on the outside of the hat, the wrong side of my ribbing is showing, and the wrong side, I believe, is my neater side. And so I did that, and it worked fine. It was super straightforward. Now the side that's showing on the brim is the same as the side that's showing on the rest of the hat. This is similar to the technique of the Oslo hat, if you're familiar with that. So anyway, I got to the part where you're starting to do the crown decreases, and they're just knit two togethers for the classic beanie. And of course, if you're doing a knit two together on the wrong side, it doesn't look like a knit two together. So I did a couple of rounds of that and realized, oh, my crown decreases look very inside out. So at that point, I decided to do, instead of knit to two togethers, to do a slip purl. So like a SSK, but I am, slipping knitwise 2 stitches and then purling two together through the back loop. And that looked exactly like a knit two together on the wrong side. And so that's the other modification I did to accommodate the first modification I chose to do, which is to, instead of doing a knit two together, do a SSP. I don't know if that's really a thing, a slip purl for all the decreases. And it was a little bit fiddlier to do that than a knit two together, obviously. But it was a decision I had made, so I just had to continue doing that. And it worked out fine. It looks as you would expect at the end of the day. So yeah, that's my little classic rip beanie. I do like the rip beanie, but I think I enjoy the process of knitting the Oslo hat a little bit more. It just was so satisfying to knit that in stockinette. And I don't mind knitting ribbing, but I think if I were to knit another hat, I may opt for just the Oslo hat, but we'll see. I may knit another one this season. I'm not really sure yet. All right, those are the 2 hats. The next item is a crocheted finished object, and it was made for Group Secret Santa. And it is a wizard kitty. So the inspiration for this was the way we do Secret Santa. Shout out to our friend Nadia, who organizes it every year. We use a website that allows each participant to put a wish list. And this recipient basically left categories of things she liked. And one of the things was black cats. And so I had seen a video by Tiffany Liu that was a gift guide video for 2022, I believe. And one of the items she featured is this cat in a life preserver, which I'll put a little link here as well. And I thought it was so adorable. And my Secret Santa recipient, she specifically said she likes black cats. And so I was at first planning to make that pattern. Obviously I didn't, but I was looking at the cat, and I think it's pretty cylindrically shaped in order for it to fit into the life preserver. But I was kind of interested in making a cat that was also standalone, because I like that the life preserver was kind of candy cane themed, so you could say it's pretty festive, but I wasn't sure that if, a life preserver doesn't have any significance to my Secret Santa recipient, that if she would want just the cat. I wanted the cat itself to look cute, basically. I decided to look for a crochet pattern because I feel more confident adapting patterns and freehanding patterns that are crochet than knitting. Maybe because not all the stitches are on your needle, and I have more experience doing amigurumi with crochet. I decided to just look for a crochet pattern for the cat. And at this point, I was still intending to make a life preserver. I was thinking I could either use the pattern or just crochet a donut shape. It's a pretty simple shape. I ended up finding a tutorial for making a crocheted cat, that shape kind of poutine-like or dumpling-like. I'll link that tutorial down below. And it was a pretty straightforward tutorial. It was a little bit difficult to understand how to construct the ear portion, but just using, my previous experiences making other similar things, I ended up just making it work. It looked like ears in the end. I was happy with it. The other modification I made was that the base is a round base, and in the tutorial she has you make the size of the cat and then crochet just a circle for the base and then sewing it together, but I decided to just crochet that continuously. So at the bottom of the cat, I just started decreasing, basically making a circle from outside in so I can just cinch in the bottom versus having to sew a whole circle. And I thought the cat itself was really cute. I stuffed it with yarn tails instead of polyfill, so it's a bit more hefty and a bit more like hefty and substantial than when I make amigurumi with polyfill. And then after that, I started to think about making the life preserver. But I realized at this point that there's definitely an intentional design for the original life preserver cat pattern to make the cat a pretty straight down cylindrical shape, because I made my cat like a trapezoidal shape. Basically, I realized that I would have to make a really, really large life preserver to fit this cat that I purposely made like more sloping. And I thought that would look a little bit funny, you know, like unless I made a really thin life preserver, which would look like a hula hoop, or if I made just a gigantic life preserver that would cover so much of the cat vertically, I don't think it would really work in this particular case. And so I was thinking about what else I can make. And then the other thing I know about this Secret Santa recipient is she's really into fantasy books and media. And so I thought maybe like a wizard cat. And so I found another tutorial it's actually a tutorial for someone who made a wizard cat for their actual cat. So I'm sure I used a different gauge than different, yarn thickness and gauge as what they use, but the stitch counts I kind of roughly followed and roughly freehanded, but I'll put that tutorial as well. So then I made the wizard hat. I embroidered on some stars with some cotton yarn that I had, and I decided not to sew it on in case, again, the recipient wanted a standalone cat, so I just loosely stitched it with some sewing thread in the back so that you can still remove it completely if you wanted to, or just rest it on there if you wanted it to be attached. So that was where I originally was going to stop, but then I showed my boyfriend and he had the idea of personalizing it by embroidering her initials on the wizard hat. Okay, I'm back and the lighting may have changed, but my camera does this very unhelpful thing where it sneakily turns off without like any indication. So I just talked for 20 minutes and it was not recorded. So I'm going to pick up where I think it left off, which is when I was talking about how I embroidered some stars on the wizard hat of the cat. And then I also embroidered the recipient's initials on it at the suggestions of my boyfriend, which I thought was a nice personalized touch. And then lastly, he also suggested a little wand. So I took a little piece of a Christmas garland that is basically like a little stick, and then I sewed that onto the cat as well. So it's got a cute little wand. And overall, I think it's really cute. I stuffed it with yarn tails instead of polyfill so that it's more substantial because yarn is heavier or denser, I should say, than polyfill. I suppose it depends on how densely you stuff it, but it's very satisfying to squish. So yeah, I don't know if the recipients opened it yet. We haven't had our Secret Santa gift reveal because folks are usually pretty busy hanging out with family during the holidays. It's typically sometime in January. So yeah. Look forward to seeing what she thinks. So with that, it's my last finished object, although I had really, really hoped that this next thing I'm going to show you is going to be finished. It is my Ingrid sweater by petiteknit. I think that's the front. Yes, that's the front. I was knitting it. I've been knitting it for a while, actually, although having been focusing on a bunch of my winter accessories, I wasn't really focusing on it over the past month or so. But during the time right before Christmas, I really, really wanted to finish it. I had really hoped this would be my Christmas sweater, and it's not finished because I ran out of yarn. So as you can see, I'm so close. This is the second and final sleeve. I'd already started knitting the cuff, but I've only got like maybe an inch on the cuff, and this is all the yarn that I have left, so obviously it's not enough. I really didn't think I would run out of yarn. I purchased 450 grams, and thought that I would have extra because typically I use about 400 grams, but now I'm realizing maybe the yardage is actually different. For whatever reason, I needed to order an extra skein, and I've done that now, and it's not such a big deal when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, but I was pretty down when I first realized I couldn't finish it because I've been working pretty hard on it. I'll tell you more about my whole knitting experience, but it was just a bit disappointing to run out of yarn. I don't like to play yarn chicken. I tried to get a little bit extra, but I guess I miscalculated. And also I ordered the yarn directly from Knitting for Olive, and so it takes a while to ship. Yeah. Let me start with the whole knitting experience though. So I had been talking about this in my last couple of videos, saying that it's not that complicated. And I think I jinxed myself because I ran into some issues after the body. In the last video, I had finished most of the body. I was just doing the ribbing at that bottom. And then after that, I knitted one sleeve. So my experience with the first sleeve, it starts with short rows. I didn't have too much issues with the short rows for the first sleeve. More on that later on the second sleeve. And then the other part that I thought was a bit challenging is that when you're doing the sleeves, there's a chart that you follow, but it also tells you to decrease every number of rows and every couple of rows, but it doesn't, the decreases aren't shown in the chart. So it just says to decrease in pattern and adjust the chart as you see fit. So that was a little bit fiddly to figure out how to do it. It wasn't so hard on the moss stitch. Yeah, and I'm looking at my decreases. It looks, pretty even, except for this one part, which, I'm not even sure if it's a mistake I made or just the way that it looks. That's the decreases on the moss stitch. And then for the cable section, the challenge is partly because I don't know what it's supposed to look like. So in the beginning, there's this little blip right here. And I did double check the pattern. I'm pretty sure this is what it's intended to look like. Please let me know if that's not the case. I mean, don't know if I'll reknit this. More on that later, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, so it continues to decrease during this cable section. You can see that this diamond is a little bit skinnier than some of the other diamonds. And then you just keep knitting. And yeah, the rest of it wasn't too bad. I did it's a tubular bind off. Yeah, it's a tubular bind off, which looks really, really nice. I had only done the Italian bind off previously. I hadn't done the tubular bind off before. I'd done the tubular cast on, but not the tubular bind off. And I think it looks really nice. So that's the first sleeve. Then the second sleeve. I should pause and say that when I was knitting this sleeve, this is obviously a sweater that requires some thought and attention. There's a lot of details, a lot of chart following, and, you need to closely pay attention to what you're doing. And during this time, I was pretty distracted. Besides preparing for the holidays, I just had a couple other things going on in my life that I found really stressful. And so whenever I sat down to knit, I wasn't the most mindful. I was pretty distracted, thinking about other things, but I didn't want to work on a mindless project. This was like the project I wanted to work on. So I just struggled through trying to focus and work on this. But because I was distracted, I made a lot of mistakes. And in a pattern like this, it's pretty hard to fix mistakes. Like a lot of times you have to tink back, and just reknit. And I did that a lot for this sweater. So it was not the most efficient garment I've ever knitted. And that led to some frustration, which I think made it even more frustrating than when I thought I had finally finished it. I ran out of yarn. But for my second sleeve, I started that, thought, great, one more sleeve to go. And then for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how to do the German short rows on the second sleeve, which is so weird because I just finished the first sleeve. And there's two main reasons for that. The first one is that I got confused about where to end the first short row. So the way short row patterns are written is, you slip the first couple of stitches, number of stitches, and then you knit the next number of stitches in pattern, then you turn. On the way back, you knit, X number of stitches on the way back from the short row. And I just couldn't figure out how many stitches to knit back from. The way the pattern is written is not knit 30 stitches or what have you. It's knit until there's this many stitches left in the round. And I just kept getting confused that the round started with the turn. But in the end, it really should be the beginning of round marker. And now the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, that's obvious. But somehow that just wouldn't click in my head when I was knitting it. So I think I reknit this 4 times. And the other issue is that I realized after the fact that I had done fewer short rows than required for the first sleeve. I haven't really done the investigative effort to figure out why it is that I knit fewer short rows than intended, but still had still had the pattern match up. Like, or maybe it didn't. Like maybe it's not symmetrical against the beginning of round. Maybe what I did was that the first short row that I set up was too long, so I didn't knit as many short rows as I should have in order to finish knitting all the stitches that were initially slipped or not knit. But that's partly why, like, I was trying to match the second sleeve to the first sleeve and to the pattern, but the first sleeve apparently isn't knit to pattern, so it just never worked out, and I didn't figure that out until a while later. And what I thought at this point was that I'll knit the second sleeve correctly with the correct short row shaping, and then I'll go back and do the cutting and grafting thing that I did on the first sleeve, similarly to how I fixed my vanilla sock from last episode. If you're curious why I spent time fixing a vanilla sock, I do talk about that a little bit more there, but essentially I thought I'd weave a lifeline right after the short rows, and cut the sleeve off and then re-knit the short rows and then graft it back on using Kitchener grafting. So I thought that would be fine. And yeah, but you know, I couldn't do that in the end anyway because I ran out of yarn. The other thing that felt like a bit of a letdown was that I just didn't know if the sweater would fit after all this work. It got to the point when it was like this, I had blocked it since, but when it was like this at first, it was so scrunched in, and I've been checking my gauge as I go. I gauge swatched, and based on my gauge, which was a little bit bigger, I thought that if I knitted an extra small, I would get small measurements, which is what I wanted, but my gauge for the moss stitch portion on the top matched what I intended on my swatch, but as I kept going, my gauge just got tighter to the point where I thought that based on that gauge pre-blocked, I would be getting a size extra small, which would be too small. And I just couldn't figure out why it's so small. I kept thinking, well, you know, the ribbing cinches in. Like the ribbing at first cinched in a lot. Like it was like this, like lots of little undulating waves because of the many rib sections and the moss stitch sections. And when I tried it on, it just was like cinched in, not what I was looking for at all. I did have hope that it would block out, but at the time, it just was a bit disappointing. What I did before I left though is I blocked it and I really stretched the bottom. So whatever the length was up here under the sleeves, I just like stretched it so that it's perfectly a box on the blocking mat, and I pinned it down and everything. And I left on my trip and just figured I'd see how it fares when I came back. I felt like I had to really stretch it out. And when I came back, it had been drying for, you know, all those days, and I tried it on and it was gorgeous, that's a very whiplash in terms of emotions there, but I'll show a little clip of me trying on this half-finished project, but it looks so nice. Like the fit was really drapey and flowy, and I really enjoyed it. I realized that the incorrectly knit sleeve is actually the perfect length after blocking, which is good news and bad news. The good news is, you know, that it's the perfect length, but then I was like, well, what's going to happen to my other sleeve that I knit correctly? Is it going to be too long? Which shouldn't be a surprise because most sweaters I knit, I have to shorten the sleeves because I have pretty short arms. I was again very conflicted because it's such a nice pattern. I worked so hard on it. I don't know. I just realized like, I don't know which sleeve I should fix. And I feel like this is I'm being very dramatic. I know. I am still currently thinking, I like the way that the correctly done short rows look. I think the shape looks a lot more nice. And so my current plan is still kind of to fix the first sleeve. But the only issue is that after my grafting job with this cable stitch, I'm not that confident anymore in my grafting capabilities the same way I was after I finished that manila sock. It just looks like there's still a pretty obvious scar, and I need to decide whether a potential scar would look better or just the slightly mismatching sleeves look better. Or am I just going to frog the first sleeve? I don't know. I think what I'll have to do now is to put this project aside. I'll wait for my yarn to get here, and I will probably just like finish the second sleeve to length and see what it looks like, and then make my decision from there. I might just wear it as is with mismatching sleeves for the season, and then later on fix it because it would be kind of a shame if I never got to wear it, because this was a work in progress during the whole time that it's actually seasonably like cold enough to wear. So more to come on that. I guess a comment on the yarn, I don't know if I mentioned already, this is knit and knitting for olive heavy merino in the color soft cognac. In the previous episodes, I was calling it light cognac, but it's actually soft cognac. And it softened up a lot after washing and blocking with Yukon wool wash, but it's still, I can't really wear it next to skin. I've now accepted that wearing a layer underneath my wool sweaters is not a big deal, so I'm just going to do that. The eyelets do kind of show what's the color of the layer that I have underneath, so I guess I'll need to be just mindful of what colors I put under it, but it feels really cozy. The drape is nice. The hand feel is really nice, so yeah. That's that. That is that. And I'll move on now. Okay. The next whip that I have is a pair of socks. Well, it's one sock for now. This is and it's not blocked, so it's hard to show, but this is the Broken Record sock, sort of. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. And I'm knitting this for my boyfriend again. So after he saw my first pair of vanilla socks, he was kind of like, oh, that's so nice. Like, how long did it take you to knit that? He is very considerate. He didn't ask me for a pair of socks because he knows that, knitting takes a really long time. And I think, deadline knitting and gift knitting can get stressful when you have a lot to knit. So he's very mindful of that. He didn't ask for it, but I felt like he deserved it. And I love my socks so much. I feel like he would really enjoy a pair of hand-knitted socks as well. So I set out to knit a pair of socks for him. I had gotten this Cascade sock yarn. This is the Cascade Heritage in the color Mossy Rock. I got it from Wool & Company. And he liked the color. I showed a couple of patterns to him. In the end, we decided this is a pattern that I feel like I would like to knit and he would like to wear. And he wanted a contrast heel and toe. So that's what I did. The contrast is, once again, Hikoo Cobasi in the color Natural, I believe. It's the same contrast yarn that I use for my vanilla sock. I don't know if I mentioned in the last video, but I got this yarn actually to make the cami number 1, this Hikoo Cobasi, or cami number 5, but it was already like late September when I was really getting into the project, and I figured like at this time, I'm not going to need a camisole, so I put that project in deep hibernation, and when I was starting my vanilla socks, I wanted a white cream contrast yarn, and so I used it. I was a little bit concerned because Hikoo Cobasi is cotton, bamboo, and silk, and I thought that it might feel jarring next to the merino for the main sock, but actually it feels pretty nice, so I just continued to use it. I'm not sure if at this point I'll have enough to make my cami number 5, but we'll see. I can always get new yarn for it, and this is a pretty nice sock yarn. I think it'll be pretty sturdy as well. So, a couple of things on this sock. This is not a secret knit because with socks, fit is a lot more important, and I wanted to be able to try it on him. I also didn't want to commit to finishing this before Christmas. I didn't think I could, and obviously I did not. So it's just going to be like a pair of socks as a gift at some undefined time with no deadline. And I cast it on a 72 stitch sock. At first I wasn't sure if it's really going to fit because when you just have a little bit of the sock knit, and I knit in magic loop, it's hard to really figure out what width it's going to be because the cable causes it to flare out. So I just decided to trust my instincts that a 72 stitch sock would work because a 64 felt great for my feet, and I'm sure his feet is a little bit bigger. So it's a 72 stitch sock. I thought I followed the pattern, but then later realized that I made the broken rib section half as dense as they should be. So it's a free pattern, so I'll share that. It's supposed to be, knit, knit, purl, knit, knit, purl. But I did knit, knit, purl, knit, knit, knit. If that makes sense. So I did a 6-stitch repeat where it's supposed to be like a 3-stitch repeat. I think it still looks quite nice. I didn't realize until I was doing the gusset section when it described the pattern again, and I was like, wait, is it supposed to be a different pattern for the rest of the foot than the leg? And of course it's not the case, but I just went with it. The math worked out perfectly because 72 is divisible by 6 and divisible by 3. I think if I cast on a 64 stitch sock, maybe it wouldn't have worked out, and I would have some, issues there, but no issues here. So very happy with the way it looks. I knit this when I was at my parents' house. Oh, I knit the cuff when I was still with my boyfriend, so I had him try it on, and it seemed like it would fit, and the rib is pretty stretchy, so that was fine. And then, I wanted to share what I did to make sure the sock fit is two things. So first, I used the same method I did to measure the heel for my vanilla socks, which is to measure the distance between the center of my ankle bone from the outside and the floor. So I measure that for my boyfriend, and that's how long I knit the heel flap. So you knit the heel flap up to that length, and because the length of the heel flap affects how many stitches you pick up for the foot at the beginning of the gusset decreases, it helps you ensure that the instep fit is a good fit, and that's the main area of potential fit issues. So I measure that, and then for the length of the foot, I follow the fish lips kiss sock pattern, which I had got because originally I really wanted to try knitting that method because I heard that it was a really nice method, an easy method that people prefer. And I considered doing that for this particular pair of socks, but my boyfriend really liked the look of the slip stitch heel, and so I decided to do that. But I still use the fish lips kiss method to figure out how long to knit the foot and the toe. So without revealing too much of what the pattern tutorial is, because it's only like a couple of dollars, it basically has you trace a cardboard foot. So this is a cardboard cutout of my cardboard cutout of my boyfriend's foot. Has you make a couple of measurements, make a couple of lines, and using that as a guide, you can figure out when to stop knitting for the foot and when to start knitting for the toe and how long to knit for the toe without having the foot nearby to try it on. So that was really convenient. I think it was really helpful because I needed to knit a longer toe section. So, had I just followed the pattern where you decrease on, I think, was it 2 stitches on either side? Yeah, where you decrease 2 stitches on either side each row, then it wouldn't have been long enough, I think. So I ended up doing that, and I still was a little bit concerned that it wasn't going to fit him, so I didn't kitchen the toe before I came back, and when I came back, I had him try it on. Perfect fit. He was so happy that I had made this much progress on the sock, and so I think the next step, I'm good to go with stitching this up, and I can get started on the other sock. So yeah, it's a pretty nice pattern. With my second sock, it went a lot faster. I didn't have to do the whole gusset fiasco that I went through the first time, where I essentially misread how to do heel gussets because on my first sock. This one went pretty quickly. But I do think that men's socks are indeed so much larger than the sock I made for myself. It's like several inches bigger than my sock. So it is like a good amount of knitting. I think I would consider, if I knitted socks for other people in the future, to consider it a DK sock, so it's a little bit less knitting, because yeah, this was a lot of sock to knit. But I'm looking forward to knitting the other one and hope that he will enjoy wearing them. All right, so that is all of the projects that I have to show. The next part for acquisitions, I wanted to show some of the knitting related Christmas gifts that I got. So the first thing that I'll show is something I'm sure you've all seen before. Many of you might have. It is the 52 Weeks of Socks book. So this has a lot of patterns I've seen on Ravelry that I'm really drawn to. I think socks are a really good opportunity to knit like fancy projects that are kind of like crafts, but crafts you can wear and crafts that look nice. So I have my eye on a couple of patterns here, and I'm really excited to do that. I do think the socks take a good amount of time, so when I do want to knit garments, I don't have as much time to do that. So yeah, there's that, but I am very excited to try some things here. So this is from my boyfriend's parents. They also got me a blocking mat. So I only took one square to show because I'm using it right now to reblock my step-by-step sweater, which I wore so much, by the way. I just had worn it like nonstop since I finished it until recently when it's gotten too warm. I I really love the yarn, but because of that, when I came back from my trip, I decided that it needed a wash, so I'm now drying it. But yeah, this is my first blocking mat. Previously, I was just laying it out on a table. For the Ingrid sweater, it was really helpful to be able to pin it down on something versus just leaving it flat. I don't think that the body would have blocked out as nicely had I not pinned it down. Like, it didn't want to stay stretched out when I was laying it flat. So I'm very grateful to have this set. The next items are from my Secret Santa for that Secret Santa gift exchange that I mentioned. So usually, I think in the past, I have sometimes put a pretty specific item and I kind of knew what I would be getting. And this year I left more, like I put like item types, but I didn't put the exact item. And I am so happy with what my Secret Santa picked for me. I don't think I would have picked them for myself if I were just buying these myself. So the first thing I put on the list is a fabric shaver or depiller. And this is what I received. It is so aesthetic. I never owned one of these before, actually. I tried to purchase one for myself, and I got it on Amazon, but the one that arrived was like obviously used and broken, so I sent it back and didn't bother getting another one. But this one, I'd never seen it shaped like this before. It's such a beautiful color. I did try it once on my cabled headband when I came back with it, and I think I'm going to give my step-by-step sweater a little shave as well. But it works really nicely, and it's also like rechargeable with a USB-C cable, so I really love this. Yeah, I'm very, very, very happy with it. And then I thought this was the whole gift, and I was very pleased with it. But then I saw a note that a second part is coming, and I haven't opened it yet. It is these adorable stitch markers. They're indeed adorable. They're these little foxes. I haven't used them yet because I just unpacked it, but let me pop it onto my needles. Oh, so cute. Yeah, these are definitely adorable. They're like even more adorable on the needle for some reason. Not sure why, but I love it. I'm so happy with it. I was surprised to see this. I really thought this was my whole gift, and I was already like very, very happy. But then these came in the mail, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that is. And yeah, this is so perfect. So thank you to my Secret Santa. And yeah, I do have some yarns, but I've been talking for so long that I think I'll just save that for next episode. I think some of the yarns that I got, I also casted on as projects, like for my Oslo hat and the classic ribbed hat. So that's a wrap on today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this podcast, I'd love if you subscribe and leave me a comment. I love chatting with y'all in the comment section. So yeah, I hope to be back soon with another episode. And until then, I hope you have a happy new year and a good rest of your day. Bye, everyone.